What if Borley Rectory was real? There is a house in Essex, England, that burned to the ground on a winter night in 1939. Before the fire, for 76 years, the house produced more documented accounts of the paranormal than any private dwelling in British history. It was called Borley Rectory. The first rectory was built in 1863 on the foundations of a 14th century priory. The man who built it, the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Wall, is said to have seen a phantom nun walking the grounds before the first brick was laid. The story begins, like so many of the cases we cover, with a single piece of paper. Subscribe for a new story every night at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. Let's get into tonight's case. In 1863, Wall found a paper in a bottle buried in the grounds. The paper described a nun from a nearby convent who had taken a vow of love for a monk, been bricked up alive in the convent walls, and whose ghost had walked the property ever since. Wall's paper was real. The convent was real. The priory was real. The nun was, as far as anyone could prove, a story. Borley Rectory was, for the next 76 years, a story that would not stop producing more stories. Before the rectory was built, the land had been the site of a 14th century Augustinian priory. The priory dissolved in 1539 under Henry VIII. A farmhouse stood on the site until Wall built the rectory in 1863. According to the legend, the land held two pieces of dark history. The first was the nun. The second was a tragedy in the late 1800s when a cart horse belonging to a farmer on the adjacent land panicked, bolted, and killed a young girl named Maria Tibbs. Her body was recovered. Her skull was never found. In the years that followed, residents of the rectory reported seeing a ghostly horse and cart on the lane and a woman's figure in the orchard. In 1900, 4 children of the Bull family, who then lived in the rectory, reported seeing the same apparition. The reports were written down by the Reverend's daughter. They were filed away. The rectory changed hands several times. The reports kept coming. By 1923, the rectory had been sold 4 times in 30 years, and each new owner had reported some form of unusual activity. The local farmers stopped walking past the property at night. The postmen asked to be reassigned. The story had become a part of the local folklore, told and retold in the pubs of Borley Village, never quite believed, never quite dismissed. Harry Price was born in 1881 in Shropshire. He was a professional magician, a debunker, a member of the Magic Circle, and later a serious researcher into the paranormal. In 1929, he read about Borley Rectory in a Daily Mirror article. The article described a rectory haunted by a nun, a phantom coach, and strange lights in the windows. Price drove to Essex the next day. He spent 8 years investigating. He brought with him every scientific instrument available in the 1930s: cameras, voice recorders, infrared equipment. He took more than 5,000 photographs. He interviewed more than 60 witnesses. He recorded more than 500 supposed incidents: footsteps, apparitions, objects thrown across rooms, handwriting appearing on walls, bells ringing with no one near them, lights flickering in patterns that could not be explained. In 1937, he published his findings in a book called The Most Haunted House in England. The book sold out in 6 weeks. It has never been out of print. Price was, by his own admission, a man who wanted to be deceived. He had spent the first half of his career exposing fraudulent mediums, and he had come to believe, in his own careful, skeptical way, that not every haunting was a fraud. He was looking for a case that would survive his own testing. Borley, he wrote in his private notebooks, was the case. The most sustained period of activity at Borley Rectory began in 1930, when the Reverend Lionel Bull moved into the rectory with his wife Rosemary, his daughter Marianne, and his son Johnny. Marianne was 13. In the autumn of 1930, Marianne reported that stones were being thrown at her from empty rooms. The stones stopped when anyone entered the room. Then the bells began to ring. Then the furniture moved. The family recorded 31 distinct poltergeist events in the year that followed. They wrote to Price. Price came. Price interviewed Marianne, her parents, the servants, the neighbors. Marianne's account, recorded at the time, is one of the most detailed first-person accounts of a poltergeist ever documented. She described the stones arriving in arcs, the bells ringing in patterns that mimicked known tunes, the handwriting on the walls appearing in fresh plaster, the light switches operating when no one was in the room. The events did not stop. In 1936, Eric Smith, a local policeman, reported seeing a figure of a woman in white walk across the rectory lawn in broad daylight. He described the figure in a sworn statement. The statement is in the archives of the Society for Psychical Research to this day. Smith's testimony is unusual. A serving policeman, on record, with no motive to invent, describing an apparition he had not been looking for. Price was not the only one to investigate. In the years between 1929 and 1939, Borley Rectory was visited by members of the Society for Psychical Research, by researchers from Cambridge, by journalists from the Daily Mirror, the Daily Mail, and the News Chronicle. The Society for Psychical Research was founded in 1882. Its members included 3 future Nobel laureates, 4 presidents of the Royal Society, and the philosopher William James. The Society had investigated cases in Britain, in Europe, and in America. It had never, in its 47 years of existence, found a case as sustained or as well documented as Borley. In 1930, the Society's investigators spent 3 days at the rectory. They witnessed, by their own signed statements, objects moving, bells ringing, and a heavy stoneware jug traveling across a room with no one near it. The reports were published in the Society's journal in 1931. The reports are still in print. Cambridge sent a physics researcher, 1C.P. Broad, who spent a week in the rectory taking measurements of the temperature, the air pressure, the radio background. He found nothing conclusive. He also found nothing he could dismiss. The Daily Mirror ran 14 stories about Borley between 1929 and 1937. The most circulated photograph of the period is one taken by a Mirror reporter in 1931, showing a piece of chalk, freshly broken, in the middle of a parquet floor, with no one near it. On the night of February 27, 1939, Borley Rectory caught fire. The fire started in the stairwell. The family, who then lived in the rectory, the Foysters, escaped. The house burned for several hours. Witnesses reported seeing a nun walk out of the flames, cross the lawn, and disappear into the hedge. A second figure, this one male, was reported. The rectory was destroyed. The ruins stood for several years. The site was excavated by Price in 1943 and 1944. Beneath the foundations, Price found fragments of human bone. He sent the bones to the British Museum. The British Museum identified the bones as belonging to a young woman, probably in her 20s, possibly of Norman descent, and consistent with a burial date in the 16th or 17th century. The bones were returned to Borley. They were reburied in the garden of the new rectory, which had been built on the site of the old one. The new rectory is still there. The bones are still in the garden. The fire itself was investigated by the Essex County Fire Service. The official report described the cause as probably accidental, arising from a faulty flue. A later private investigation by a local historian, published in 1978, suggested that the fire had been started deliberately by a man who had previously been convicted of arson at a neighboring property. The man was never charged in connection with Borley. He died in 1945. After Price's death in 1948, the Borley case took a strange turn. In 1950, a woman named Mary Plowright came forward. She claimed to be the niece of the original Reverend Wall. She produced a letter, supposedly written by Wall, describing the legend of the nun. Critics pointed out that the letter was written on paper of a kind not manufactured until decades after Wall's death. The forgery, once confirmed, raised questions about how much of Price's own work had been similarly constructed. The case was reopened. Price's widow, Olive, defended her husband's work. The Society for Psychical Research, which had initially endorsed Price, later distanced itself from his findings. New investigators, including Eric Dingwall, re-examined the evidence. Many of the photographs were declared hoaxes. Many of the witnesses were declared unreliable. The case was, in the official record, debunked. The bones in the garden are still there. The rectory is still there. The legend, in Essex, has never gone away. Price himself had written in a private notebook found after his death that he expected to be debunked. He wrote that he was more interested in the witnesses than in the phenomena. The witnesses, he wrote, were not lying. They were, he said, seeing something. What they were seeing was, in his view, a question that would not be answered in his lifetime. It has not been answered in ours. In 2007, the BBC made a documentary called The Ghost Hunter and the Nun. In 2009, the Channel 5 series Most Haunted filmed an episode at the site. In 2025, a team of paranormal researchers spent a week in the rectory and reported more than 40 incidents on camera. The rectory is privately owned. The new rectory, the bones, the cellar, the grounds are all visible from the lane. The original rectory is gone. The priory is gone. The convent is gone. The nun, if she was ever there, is gone. What remains is the record. 60 witnesses, 5,000 photographs, 500 reported incidents, 3 scientific investigations, 2 books, 1 fire, and a set of bones in a garden. Subscribe for a new story every night at 8 p.m. Never miss a case. What if Borley Rectory was real?